Hello, everyone. Welcome to our discussion with the composers of each of the Decameron Opera Coalition's first 9 operas. Thank you for joining us tonight. I'm composer Peter Hilliard. Librettist Matt Baresi and I wrote the Frame Opera, which is, I suppose, technically the 10th opera that ties all the other individual pieces together. If you have questions for me or for our guests tonight, you can comment wherever you're watching right now. And there are people who will pass those questions to me, and I'll do my best to get your questions answered too. So I'd love it if the composers could each introduce yourself and tell us what piece you wrote, the company you wrote it for, and maybe, if you remember it, the first opera you ever remember seeing. The first opera you remember seeing, and we'll start with Jasmine Barnes. Jasmine.
It's always shocking to be first.
Yeah, well, it's alphabetical, so you got that B in your name, and there you are.
All right. Hi everyone. I'm Jasmine Barnes. The question was, all right. Oh wait, I wrote the Late Walk for Bear Opera. I'm super excited to have worked with Bear Opera, and it was such a great opportunity and great experience. The first opera I've ever seen was actually I was in it at the same time. So I had never seen opera and I had never performed opera, but I did all of that at the same time. So my first time singing an opera, I was Serena in Porgy and Bess.
Oh man.
Yeah, and I was 19, and that was the first time I saw an opera too. So because I was in it. I don't know if that okay.
That's
So,
awesome. Wait, that's not, I don't think that's so unusual, actually. I know a number of people who their first opera they ever saw they were in. But what a first opera to be in. Yeah, KF Jacques right there. What a first opera to be in. Wow, that's wild. Wonderful. Great. And so the next person, Elizabeth Blood, would you introduce yourself?
Sure. I am Elizabeth Blood, and I wrote Orsa Ibernata for Milwaukee Opera Theater. And yeah, such an amazing experience. It was the first piece I ever wrote, so I was very excited to give it a go, I guess. And I was also the first opera that I saw. I was also in. It was L'Enfant à la Sortilège by Ravel. I played the little wallpaper shepherd. So that was, yeah, it's fun.
So wait, how old were you when you?
20 years old.
Okay. Wow. Right off the bat, holy cow. L'Enfant, that's amazing. That's amazing. And I still can't get over that this is your first piece. It's absolutely wild.
Thank you.
Michael, I believe you're up next. Michael Ching.
Hi, I'm Michael Ching, and I wrote Dinner for Three with Deborah Bavort for the Fargo Moorhead Opera. And that's the Zoom background I have, is the house it takes place in. The first opera I ever saw was Leonard Bernstein's Trouble in Tahiti.
Great. And you weren't in it. Okay. Beautiful. Well, we love your work. Maria, I believe Maria Thompson Corley is up next. Tell us about yourself.
Well, you already said I was Maria Thompson Corley. That's correct. Fly Where You Are for an opera theater based in I think it's Minneapolis, St. Paul, Minnesota. And honestly, I didn't grow up seeing a lot of opera. So the first one that was really, really memorable to me that I could think of was seeing Bluebeard's Castle and Irrwartung at the Met with Jesse Norman and Samuel Ramey. And that was when I was in the master's program at Juilliard, actually. So I was, how old was I? I'm so lame. Anyway, I was in my early 20s when I saw it. So yeah.
I would imagine that production would make an impression on somebody.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Stunning.
Wow. Wonderful. Mark, you're up next.
Great. So it's great to see you all, really, and thank you for having me. I'm the composer of The Roost, which I wrote for urban areas and with the librettist John de los Santos. And I believe that the first opera I saw was a bit unusual. I think I was around 16, and I saw it on the screen live on a cinema. It's something that I don't know if it's done in America, but I was in Barcelona, and you have these like live performances from all over the world. I don't remember what production it was exactly, but I remember it was Don Giovanni. And I don't think it was as memorable as seeing it live, but it was funny because people were coming in with the popcorn and everything, thinking it was, I don't know, some blockbuster or something. And then they immediately realized that something was wrong, that was not a movie, and then they left. It was one of the few, but I mean, still it was, wonderful experience.
That's funny. They do have that here. The Met streams, ordinarily they stream into movie theaters. And every time I go to those, I feel like I'm like in a secret club with the people who are going in, that everybody thinks we're going to see a movie, but we're actually seeing an opera. Look out. Great. KF Jacques, talk to us.
Kari F. Jacques Laurent. I am the composer of Corsair for Chicago Fringe Opera. And my first opera I was also in as an 11-year-old children's chorus member for Boito's Mephistopheles at Lyric Opera of Chicago with Samuel Ramey.
Oh, I'm sure Samuel Ramey would be very happy to hear how many formative experiences was he wearing a shirt?
No. So I got a sign. I had him sign a picture for me, an autographed picture, and later I understudied him for a concert at Roosevelt University, and I took it back to him and showed him and told him that was my first opera experience.
Oh, what a great story. My goodness. Wonderful. Donya. Oh, unmute yourself.
Hi, let's try this again. I'm the composer and librettist for Seven Spells, which was commissioned by Opera The Heights. And the first opera I saw was on Egyptian television, Verdi's Aida, which was like performed the first time in Cairo and at the Cairo Opera House. And so and also the theme, the Aida theme, the famous theme was always playing on Egyptian national television. It's so weird, right? Because anyway, but I didn't see, and the first opera I saw in person was, I think, Don Giovanni, but I don't really remember, unfortunately.
Wow. Well, that's a great story. Fantastic. Very good. And I think next is Gilda.
Yes. Hi, I'm Gilda Lyons. I wrote Sourdough Rise Up for Resonance Works Pittsburgh. And my first opera experience is really linked to my family experience because my mother's from Nicaragua. My grandfather was a musician and played the marimba with his brothers, 5 brothers, and he loved opera. And so he named my mother Gilda from Verdi's Rigoletto.
I was wondering if there was some connection.
Yeah. And so but it skipped a generation. My mother sang beautifully and played the guitar, and I grew up on folk music and pop music. And my dad's, South Buffalo Irish. So I grew up on folk tunes and pop tunes, but they felt it was really important for me to see Rigoletto. So I remember watching it on Channel 13 PBS when I was growing up, and I was a kid, and that was definitely my first experience, and I had to wrap my head around what happened to Gilda. So
yeah, Gilda gets a bad deal in that opera.
I'm a soprano, so it was good to reconcile it then, because it's a lifelong reconciliation.
I suppose so. I can remember my eldest daughter I was going through a Don Giovanni phase, like some of you seem to have, and I was listening to La Ci di Romano a lot. She was singing along, and I thought, I don't know if this is really the right thing for you to sing with me, your dad. That seems kind of weird, but it's, such as opera. It's a great tune. All right, Rachel, with the last alphabetical last name. Oh, mute. There you go.
Good now, right? Yes. Hi. Sorry, let's try that again. I'm Rachel Peters. I wrote the music for Everything Comes to a Head, which was commissioned and produced by Lyric Opera of the North. And the first opera I ever saw was Porgy and Bess when I was 10. I was not in it, you will be happy to know, but I was in other things later on.
What were you in later on? Now I got to know.
Well, I was in the children's chorus of Otello with the St. Louis Children's Choirs who performed with the symphony there. And then I was also in the children's chorus of Falstaff with Opera Theater of St. Louis. So that was my childhood exposure to opera.
So the big two Verdi operas you were in as a child, and then Porgy and Bess. That is wild.
I saw Porgy and Bess, yeah.
Yeah, right. No, sure. Yes, we've made that's clear. Yes. Good. Well, I guess I have to tell you, my first opera, I saw a traveling production of La Boheme. I grew up in very far Northern California, and the Marilla program came up. And so I saw Boheme and knocked my socks off. It blew me away. I always think those things are kind of formative. Sometimes you run into an opera composer who doesn't remember their first opera at all, or didn't really have a big kind of childhood experience with it. But it's interesting to me to think about, like, how did this happen? Like, how did you get opera? You tell people I write operas, and then they look at you like, you what? It's like you restore old boats or something. It's a very niche kind of thing. Uh, well, we've heard from almost every one of you in the little talkbacks after the pieces premiered about the pieces you wrote for the project and the process of writing the pieces. And I want to remind our viewers that you can stream all of these operas. They're wonderful operas on demand for the rest of the month at DecameronOperaCoalition.org. But today, since we're all here together, I thought I might ask you some more wide-ranging kind of general questions about writing opera. I figure there's people here who may be watching who are just sort of generally curious about composing operas, and there may be composers watching this either live or the recording of it, or librettists who may want some insight about how this crazy process of writing an opera works. And I figure there's people here in this room, in this Zoom room, who are established opera composers who've written many operas, who are well known as opera composers, and others have just written their very first opera. And I think there's actually great insight to be had from each perspective. I've written a lot of opera, so I think I've learned some things, but that also means that I've got a bunch of ideas stuck in my head about what opera can be and how you're supposed to make it. And some of those things might not be true, actually. So to each of our composers here, your perspective is really valued, and I'll bet our viewers are really interested to hear what you think. And it'd be wonderful if we heard over the course of the hour we have here ideas as diverse and wonderful as you and your pieces are. So the first question I'd like to ask is kind of bouncing off of that question about your first opera. What drew you to writing opera in the first place? So there's a lot of different kinds of music. There's even a lot of different kinds of classical music, right? So why opera? And I'll just throw it out there. Anybody who wants to jump in and start us off, go ahead.
I will, because I wrote opera because I was asked to write opera. This was my first attempt at writing an opera, and I had written some art songs. And even that, thinking of myself as a composer is a relatively recent thing, even though I've done a lot of arranging of spirituals and choral, mainly hymns, choral, and spirituals, etc. So the actual composing aspect of it, I'm feeling some level of confidence in, doing the whole thing myself was maybe just a couple of years. And then when Kelly Turpin from an opera theater asked me to write this piece based on hearing some of my art songs, it was with some trepidation. But I mean, I guess the fact that I'm used to writing for voice, made that a little bit less intimidating. And I've collaborated with a lot of singers. And so it was just one of those, just say yes and see what happens things. So that's my story.
Well, your piece, I know I've said this many times to you, is just so beautiful and really devastating to watch in the very best way. So I'm just very glad that they asked you.
Thank
Yeah,
you.
fantastic. Others, why opera?
I can speak to it a little bit. I came from a producer background. My formal training was in opera performance, so I knew that side of it very well. And at the same time that I was training, and when I moved on to a professional opera career, I started dabbling in making beats and stuff like that. And so that's how I started combining opera and hip hop. And so this is my first, like, just opera actually, but I've incorporated a lot of other things in it, obviously, because I want to bring my full experience to it.
So if I could just follow up on that, because you and I, we got to have a drink sometime in real life. We can really get to the bottom of all these questions, because I'm so interested in your story. You 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 were a vocal performance major, or right? So you must have been drawn to opera in that way, right? As a performer.
Yeah, I started in high school with the formal voice training. But yeah, the minute I hit that stage at Lyric and the children's chorus, and I saw these things going on backstage, I fell in love with
I
the
want some of
stage.
that.
I fell in love with the opera. I fell in love with all of it. So, like you said, it was a formative experience. I think more so being on the stage rather than watching.
Yeah, I mean, I was a voice major for a year and a half right at the beginning of my undergrad, and I realized that I didn't have the instrument to make a career out of it. So I fell into composing because I loved opera and I wanted to be a part of it, and it wasn't going to happen as a singer, you know. So I think that's a story that maybe resonates with others of you too. Uh, let's hear others.
I think it's interesting, Peter. You came at it from loving opera and therefore wanting to write opera, and I came at it from loving the experience of of a dramatic arc, right? And that, as a vocalist myself and as a composer myself, those were the ways that I could dug in and could connect. And that's the only thing I'm really interested in as a performer, composer, person, is to make a connection. And that opera is the medium in which we can tell a story and explore a large arc that isn't divided up into necessarily, it's different from a song cycle, as we all know, right? And so there's the potentiality for just all sorts of different different ways to construct an arc. It's right there, and I think that was what was so exciting to me about it as a medium. And then, as Maria was saying, lucky enough to be asked, like that's the great privilege, is when you get to actually drive the car.
Yeah. Well, I really want to hear from everybody else about why they chose this field. But Jill, you said something that I thought was so interesting. You said everybody knows that writing an opera is not the same as writing a song cycle. Opera is not a song cycle. I completely agree with you. But I think maybe the reasons for that are not clear to everyone, especially people who haven't gotten their head around the problem. For example, nobody wrote song cycles better than Schubert and Schumann, and neither of them wrote an opera that's any good. Like Schubert, I think, wrote one that we don't do anymore. If anybody could write to story, it had to be Schubert. Why couldn't he do it? You know what I mean? So, Gilda, what do you think is for you? What's the difference between those two things?
Well, and that's the key component, is for me, because it starts to get into dangerous territory of then actually defining what opera is. It can't be defined. It's an art form, and it absolutely, every single person in this room and the wider rooms, any approach that they have toward what an opera is a valid approach. For
Sure.
me, as a person who's written a lot of art song and written opera, it is about the arc that one creates and the space in which the space it inhabits, and it's a staged medium, right? That we're using the visual component in a different way, and we're thinking about movement, and we're thinking about it in terms of theater rather than art for me, and song cycles, which are a more intimate experience just in terms of the communication. That's and to me it's also the arc, the length, the duration of the arc is it when you're thinking in terms of 45, 60, or 120 minutes, that's we're thinking architecturally differently.
Sure. This is so fascinating to me, and I really want to get to it later. But just to put a pin in that, I find one of the hardest things about writing opera is keeping 40 minutes in your head at a time, because you don't write 40 minutes at a time. You write 1 minute at a time. And then as you're seeing what you have, you're playing 4 minutes of it. You're like, how does that feel? You try to get 10 minutes. And as you're playing it and trying to sing the parts by yourself, you really can't listen to 20 minutes of your own stuff and go, what does this feel like? You know what I mean? Very hard to keep something big in your brain conceptually as you're working on it. That's fascinating. All right, I'm talking enough. Somebody else, tell us why opera. Michael, tell us why you write opera. You write a lot of it.
Well, actually, my initial impetus when I was younger is that I liked the opera audience. It's not a polite, oh, wasn't that lovely kind of audience, and I really don't like that kind of audience. And opera audiences cheer, they bravo, they sometimes boo. They'll boo the villain, and so I really liked that demonstrative, almost athletic event kind of feel to it. And it was really one of the first things that drew me to opera, was that feel like the audience was so involved. And so that was my initial impetus.
Yeah, boy, that's great. Opera audiences really are very different from other audiences. You always think about like these stories about like Maria Callas at the end of her career, and somebody throws garlic on the stage and she picks it up like it's flowers, not knowing what it is. Imagine, well, first of all, that story's crazy, but imagine going to the opera and bringing garlic in case it sucks and you want to throw something on the stage. That's a level of commitment to being horrible, let's face it, but that's a level of commitment to the art form that I think you would not find in many other places, right? You don't bring tomatoes to the movie theater,
And they had to bring, didn't they have to bring flowers and garlic in case?
Yeah, right. Like, which one is it going to be, Maria? That's wild. All right. Anybody else? Anybody want to share why you're getting into this business? Rachel.
Sure. Well, I kind of defected from musical theater. As you know, I got my master's degree in writing musicals. And at the time, I feel like there was a real sort of tonal and stylistic shift in what musicals were being produced predominantly. And it was something that I was not great at. It was not where I felt like my home was artistically. And there was a stylistic shift in vocal performance, I think, that became very prevalent, that was not something that I enjoyed writing. And it was the hybrid of what the operatic voice does and what musicals do in terms of storytelling, where I felt like I really lived. And so it was that combined with, I was trained classically as a composer as well, but I didn't want to write symphonic music or anything without voice or anything without a story to it. And so I felt kind of like I was bumper bowling, that we had the symphonic music over here and musical theater over here, and I was kind of going back and forth, and opera was the only way forward. And it's the best way forward, and it's thrilling, and I love it.
Rachel, you and I both went to NYU, the Graduate Music Theater Writing Program, so we have that connection as well. I just got to say, like, in terms of the elevator pitch for why y'all should write operas, is to me, opera right now, you can write so many different things and call it an opera and get it, and everyone's cool with it. If you go see a musical, the audience knows what they want it to be, and maybe you want to write that. But if you don't want to write that narrow sliver of what a musical is at this very moment, there's no room for you. Opera's a big tent. Like, look at the pieces that we got in this project. The diversity of tone, of storytelling styles, of music is crazy. It's awesome.
That's actually that's part of why I started, like, I was interested in opera from a very young age because of the interdisciplinary aspect of it.
Oh, yeah.
And I just remember, like, one of the really very major influences that I had as a teenage girl was this book called In the Time of the Butterflies. I don't know if anyone's read it, but it's by Julia Alvarez. And it's historical fiction. It's about the Mirabal sisters who basically were assassinated in the 1960s because they were part of a rebellion, the resistance against Trujillo, the dictator of the Dominican Republic. So I was reading that, and like, I'm very politically, like, I don't think that I can separate like my politics from my music and my art. And I remember being like 13 or 14 and reading that and thinking, oh my God, this is an intergenerational story with four women who are sisters. And I was in college, and I loved orchestra music, and I loved vocal music, and I was like, okay, and I love storytelling. So I wanted to write this opera, which I did end up writing it. It's called Seamstress. It's a documentary opera based on the collected oral histories of women in my family. And it's got a film component, and it's about 45 minutes long right now. It's got a film component, and it's got a dance component. And you can't, but it's also very experimental, and you can't really go there with musical theater. Like, it's not as expansive in terms of exactly what Peter was saying, in terms of like the different ways that you can incorporate histories and interdisciplinary art. So that's what drew me to opera, is using it as a vehicle to tell these stories, which is also very similar to what Gilda was saying, and also like what Peter was saying earlier. So
Fascinating. We have one comment that's come in here that I think we can kind of go from the topics we've already been talking about. Kate asks, how do you balance composing music that serves the story versus music can be enjoyed in the abstract and have a life of its own? So how do you balance the musical interest of the piece versus the story parts of the piece?
I think they're the same thing. I don't think of them as separate at all. And yeah.
I was going to say something similar, which is just that, I mean, and I've only written one opera. Maybe when I go further, I'll think, okay, I need to make sure I have a big moment that can be excerpted and, stands by itself or, that sort of thing. But for the moment, I would think that, yeah, it was just all about conveying the emotion of the words and really telling the story.
I combine everything. So I'll have like the recordings of the oral histories from my family members, like my last opera combined with video, like documentary narrative style, and to kind of help the audience along visually. So I use a lot of visuals in my work.
Great. Great. Well, I have a quote here. Aaron
hasn't responded to the last two questions.
Yeah.
I just want to point out I haven't.
What's that?
I want to hold space for Jasmine and Elizabeth because they
yes,
haven't
please
questions.
Jump in. I want to hear from Elizabeth and Jasmine.
Sure. So I came into it as a singer. I always liked to sing growing up. That's the thing that lit me up. So I went to school for singing, not knowing anything about classical singing, not knowing that I would be any good or anything. I was just like, oh, I like to sing. I'm going to go and do this. So I went, and I thought I was going to be a music teacher. And the very first day, it was like just the initial meeting. I was like, no, I don't think I don't want to be a teacher. I don't want to be a music teacher. So I went into the performance area, and I just learned that it was just the right path for me. And using my entire body to make these operatic noises is just like something that cannot be, you can't like compare it to anything. And so I come from the singing side of it, and now writing something, which my opera was very like, there were moments where I used my whole body, but there was also subdued moments. But yeah, that's where I came from, and also just being asked, having that privilege and honor and blessing. It was amazing. So
yeah. Jasmine, let's hear from you. I don't want to put anybody on the spot, but I do desperately want to hear from everybody.
It's just hard to like compress a long story, if that makes any sense. And I was like mentally processing how to compress it. Okay. Yeah, I did not come from a musical family. I did not see any operas. I didn't really listen to classical music. I didn't do any of those things. I didn't do what is like the standard for like what people say when they say, "Oh, you're an opera composer." Is like they have this vision and this mold of what you're supposed to be, and I'm just not that at all. And I think that is why I love doing it for the same exact reason, because for me, I started learning the violin. I don't play it anymore, so don't ask. But I started learning in like second grade, and I quit in fourth grade because my brothers did. And yeah, and then when I went to high school, I was like, I want to do something musical. And I mind you, I still wasn't singing at this point, but I was in the marching band, I was in the concert band, I did like anything I could get my hands on. I was playing the trumpet, I was playing the tuba, I played the snare drum, I played the bass drum, I played whatever I could get my hands on. And then when I got to college, I said, I don't want to do that anymore. And I studied architecture. Like, no, I'm so serious. And everyone was like, why'd you do that? So I'm so not what people view as like, oh, you're an opera composer. But yeah, when I switched my major to voice, that's when I started to listen to it, study it, and just find all this beauty in it and just collect sounds, you know. And I feel like through my life, I've just collected all these, you know, sounds, and it's just now just what I write, you know. Singing opera and the experience, I'm similar to a lot of you in singing and performing opera and then getting into the medium of writing it. I think now for me in writing, I try to, I don't know how to say this. I try to voice it the way I would like want to perform it. I don't know if that makes any sense.
Oh, it makes perfect sense.
Like I sing like everything. Like I sing everything. When I say everything, like if I want to hear something specific, a line I want to hear like in clarinets or something like that, or if I want to hear like a passage in the strings, I hear it in voices in my head. I don't hear it in its instrument sound. And then I think about the sound once I write it out and kind of pair it with other voices. I don't know. Anyways, I've written 2 operas. I'm writing one, and the one I'm writing is my first one. So it's taken 3 years. We're still writing it. I wrote one for my school that I work at. I work at Booker T in Dallas, Texas, high school performing arts. And yes, we met. We met.
I was like, she looks so familiar to me, and I don't know why is she so familiar? And I kept, okay, cool.
You met my composition students. Yeah.
It was so awesome. It was so cool.
I want to wrap this up because I feel like
composition students are so incredibly talented. I was just blown away the whole time. Like, I was like, one person wrote a string quartet, right? And it was such a good quartet. It was like, anyway, I don't want to talk over you, but yeah.
No, I don't. We'll catch up because I have some.
That's awesome.
I want to talk to you.
Well, Jasmine, I again, I want to get to Mark here too because we haven't heard from him yet. But Jasmine, I've seen your orchestrations, and you're talking about having like played a bunch of instruments a little bit. Don't you think that's helped you as an orchestrator to kind of think about each of the instruments from the performer's perspective in addition to the voice?
Absolutely. Like when I teach my composition students, I tell them like you need to know each instrument for what it's worth, what it can do, what's comfortable, what's not comfortable, how does it pair well in sound with another instrument, how like just know everything about it like you would your personal instrument and like write that way. Not you don't have to play it, but you know, functionality.
Well, yeah. Right. Awesome. Mark.
Yes. So in my case, actually, this operatic adventure, which also it's my first opera, came as quite a very happy accident. So I was really became really in love with voice once I read a book by the Belarusian Nobel Prize winner of 2015, Svetlana Alexievich. This is because my wife is Ukrainian, and I just was looking for books about her country or her heritage to know more. It's so powerful. This book, it's really like War and Peace in scope, but it's made up of uh, real life interviews to people, and then it's like this like polyphonic work of voices. And I decided to write a song cycle of it. So it was really a struggle to get the rights, but I got them. And as I was writing these songs, I just realized that there was such an operatic potential. They were so dramatic, so many things could be done with it. So I became really interested in the opera world. I orchestrated the songs, and then I looked for some lessons at Juilliard. That I am now a doctoral candidate there, and I was lucky enough to go to a class, and then I met John de los Santos, that would be the librettist, and he's wonderful director and librettist, and this opportunity came up, and it was really a terrific experience for me. I learned a lot, and I had so much fun. So yeah.
So that's interesting. So it sounds like you were writing, and it kind of grew into an operatic proportion in some way, right? Like it got big enough, the idea that it needed to be expressed operatically.
Yes, absolutely. So it was really a kind of urge. It's not that I decided, yes, I want to write this opera. That now, I want to go to this great, illustrious genre of music. It was really like a creative call. And it was really the result of me looking for ways of learning, connecting with people. And hopefully now we will write a second opera. So it's really great. And I want to say something. Just I remember when you were talking before about Schubert and the song cycle and all that, and I just have to say, poor Schubert. he sometimes I think that he wrote wonderful operas. I don't know how many he did or abandoned, but sometimes to find a good librettist can be so hard.
Boy, that is true.
And also,
yeah, he didn't have a good librettist, and you're sort of dead in the water without one.
And also being in the same time where Rossini was all rage, it was also possibly not the best moment to become an opera composer.
Yes, right. It's true. Well, I don't want to step on anybody if anybody's got anything else to add, but I have something to go on if we'd like. Anybody want to jump on to any irons we've already got lit? Okay. I found this quote, and I hope this goes somewhere. Aaron Copland asked Benjamin Britten what skills it took to write a good opera. And of course, you go, oh, that'd be interesting to find out. Britten knew a thing or two about writing opera. And Britten apparently said that the most important thing a composer must have is the ability to write many kinds of music. Chorus alone, chorus with orchestra, soloists separately, soloists in ensemble, and so on. And Britten said that the needs are so varied that one must have a terrific facility to handle them all. For myself, I found that to be the case. Writing operas, especially the longer they get, the more tools I have to figure out how to use. Has that been your experience? How is this process of writing an opera different from writing a song cycle or writing a folk song setting? Or what do you got to get your head around to do it?
I'll go first because I think I kind of went the song cycle route with mine because I divided everything into the way that the story was originally told in the Decameron about this corsair, the seafaring pirate. Everything was divided up into paragraphs, so I made each paragraph into a different mode, a different song, if you will. So it kind of lends itself to the song cycle philosophy, but it was the first time I ever put together like one coherent piece that had a beginning, middle, and end. So it, in that respect, I think it was definitely more operatic, and I'm looking forward to exploring this and doing something longer so that I can compare and see how those things might line up.
I think the quote's a beautiful quote because it brings up the different kinds of music that you have to immerse yourself in different kinds of music if you're looking at a big arc. And because if it all sounds the same, then the composer hasn't done the triage for the listener, right? I mean, that's our job, is to help signal okay. So I started by saying opera is anything. So now I'm telling you what my opinion is, okay? But for me, my job as a composer is to make the decision of what's exposition, and now what makes you weep, what makes you laugh, and so the way that we do that, Britain talks about solos and ensemble, and absolutely that's true, but I think in terms of the nature of the music itself, the musical moments, this music is fast, this music is expansive. It's the kind of music that we're wrestling with, and the willingness to allow your characters to determine what that sound is, and the willingness to lock into those moments architecturally that are going to speed along or expand.
That's fascinating. Yeah. I often think about, not to denigrate it because it's just a totally different thing, but if I go and see a 45-minute symphony and I get bored about minute 35, I don't complain about it. I just go, well, I guess I just didn't understand that part. But if you write an opera and it starts to get a little slack after about a half an hour, the audience will tell you. You know what I mean? It's much more unforgiving in that way because the audience really expects you to take care of them over the period of the piece. It's interesting.
I was once in a talk with George Benjamin, and he said that it was interesting that for him operas, and of course it applies. I think that the Cameron Coalition, the format is quite reduced, isn't it? It's like really chamber opera, but in operas like Written in the Skin, he was talking about using a thicker musical brush, talking about the amount of detail and the amount of all these tiny little things that must go into the music, that you really have to switch gears and think more on the long run, broader processes. And I think that's interesting, actually. I think that the same that would apply for any other composition applies to opera. It's a different beast, a different instrument. And it's, I think, a matter of change this year, honestly.
I was going to say, I know that, again, as I said, I don't have a lot of experience, but, I try to look for things like if you have something that's long, it still has to have some cohesiveness. And the ways to do that is, as Gilda was saying, this is the music that perhaps expresses the friendship between the women. And, that was in my particular opera, there was this central friendship. And so, I had something that was similar at the moments that they were expressing particular things, or, he or she is contemplating escaping her situation, and so that music sort of echoes the music of her friend thinking of empowering her to escape the situation. So I think, as far as those architectural things that, perhaps in a song cycle, sometimes there's music that will recur, and that Schumann likes to have, the postlude that echoes back to something that happened before. But, in my very inexperienced experience, I would say, that's the sort of thing that draws us forward, is just that idea that, okay, we understand that this emotional music is for something, that perhaps ties into something else. It's not just you're wandering in the woods and you're completely lost, but, there's something that binds it all together and comes back, and you feel like, okay, I'm sort of home, or I kind of know, what I'm feeling based on even if you don't remember it exactly, just that, this music was related to something that was a similar situation, if that made any sense.
Sure. I mean, music is a temporal art form, right? And so if we're going to draw connections, we have to be thinking about what is the function of this and does it come back? Do we ever see this again? Do we ever feel this again?
Yeah.
Yeah. We have a few comments from folks who are watching. Kate Jackman says, Michael Ching, I'm so grateful to have performed your music. Thank you. And thank you all for your artistry. Love hearing from performers. That's in a way the greatest compliment is hearing from a performer that they enjoyed playing your music or singing.
Happy birthday, Kate Jackman.
Yes, happy birthday. And then Rob Chafin says, telling the story is so important. Thanks for this. Yeah, really, this is about stories, I don't know who this was, but it's an interesting comment. I'd love to hear your opinions. Does anyone have an opinion about why the new operas that get all the attention, the big premieres at the big companies, are all huge and super serious? Is there a way forward for these smaller pieces that can be performed by more organizations and seen by more people, and also maybe have a better chance of being comedies? Anyone want to tackle that? Why are all the premieres so gigantic and bloated?
Opera's a big ship. I mean, it's an ocean liner, and so I think it's understandable. And historically, we certainly have comedies, but the ones that people, I feel that the ones that if somebody had to pick one opera, I bet you probably. I mean, I don't know, but I'm thinking it might not be a comedy if they had to pick one that would define what opera is for them.
Well, if you look at the top 20 that are performed in the world, Marriage of Figaro is kind of a comedy sometimes, but like most of them are not. Yeah, you're right.
But I also think it is a big ship, but it's also a big tent, and there are lots and lots and lots of different ways that opera is being experienced right now, and that these smaller operas, there are so many companies that are trying to change. They really, I think that there are a lot of companies that really are working to change and working to connect in different ways with different groups of people, and that the outreach that they're doing is perfect for a lot of emerging composers who are writing small pieces right now. So I think that I think that the nature of the question is kind of putting the huge things and comparing them to the smaller ones, but the smaller ones may not ever get onto the main stage, but it doesn't mean that they won't be experienced by a lot of people.
Sure.
It's just the nature of it is going to be a different exchange.
Yes.
I know I'm talking. I was thinking of like Oscar-worthy movies, like when people do things and have the money to do things on a big scale, and then you think of what wins the Oscar? Is it the comedy? And comedy is very difficult. I mean, making people laugh. I don't know how people are stand-up comedians, honestly. That to me is a level of bravery that I can't even imagine. So I think that's kind of what it is. You feel like you have to make some big, important statement if you're going to invest a lot of money and do something new, if you know what I mean.
Yeah, Rachel.
I think we're also having a very hard time agreeing, both as an operatic community and as a culture at large, about what is funny and what constitutes comedy. And I think that in that environment, it's very difficult for people who have the resources to give to put that into a big production to make a definitive statement that will last for a long time about what is funny. Like I could go on about this forever, but I feel like opera funny is not funny anymore and has not been funny for a long time. So I feel like that's for many reasons, but yeah, I just feel like this is a real tough time to write something comedic that people are going to feel is universal. But it's a challenge that I love, and I'm going to continue to sort of poke at.
A challenge you're succeeding at, I think.
Thank you.
I personally don't have a problem with like the big companies doing the huge operas. The reason why, and for them being serious, that's the part that I should have said. Because I think right now we're in a place similar to what Rachel was saying. I think we're in a place right now. There's so much to discuss. And the first place that everyone in society goes to discuss those things is art. And so I think it's important to still have art as the vehicle to to bring up those difficult and uncomfortable topics and those very serious topics that you don't really want to have in person, and you want to be more lighthearted in person, and talk about things that are woo, yay, we love, we want to uplift each other. But I think art is a statement, and it goes along with history. And I think, um, yes, there are smaller operas that can be serious and still have a statement as well. And I definitely, if anything, I actually see those program way more personally, my sites of, I see that program a lot more than the really large operas with huge orchestration. And maybe that's just my outlook on it. But yeah, I just think our job is to still provide a artistic space and a comfortable space for people to process their feelings on difficult subjects. But yeah, that's me.
Yeah. Yeah. Uh, so many thoughts. I think the real issue are these giant productions getting a second production. A lot of resources go into that first production, and I think sometimes when you have to get millions and millions of dollars together, boy, it better be big and it better be important, right? Otherwise, why are we spending all this money? But I think projects like this one show that opera can work on a much smaller scale. And speaking personally, I've had a lot more success with little pieces getting second and third productions than giant ones. Who's got the money? Yeah.
What was so beautiful about this production was that so many people, like for example, my friends, members of my community that watch this, like they'd never seen opera. They don't consider themselves like opera enthusiasts. People outside my composer circle, and they really loved it. Like they watched all 4 episodes. I thought, oh, they're gonna just watch mine because they're my friends. But so I was really happy with the fact that they, drew them in. And so it goes to show you how access is actually a huge part of opera generally. And so this project that wasn't really an issue. It was so easy to enjoy and stream. And I think it's one positive thing about COVID was artists and companies coming together and finding new ways to make their work more accessible and for people to be able to really engage with it on such an intimate level, I think was really cool. So if there's a way that we can translate that as a community post-COVID, I think that would be really powerful. I don't know how we would do that,
But I think you really hit the nail on the head there. I think a lot of people have conceptions about what it means to go to the opera, and of course that's always changing. But there are people who would see this project who would never see an opera in a traditional venue. Yeah.
I ran an opera company for 18 years, and the opera field has gotten smaller. The works have gotten smaller. And the ability of an opera company, say in the 90s, early 90s, the opera company might have done 3 big main stage works. And then, by now, they may be doing 1 big main stage work, a couple of chamber operas, and a couple of small things. And so really the field it's a great time to be writing shorter works and smaller works.
Yes, agreed. The person who asked that question said, "Great answers, thank you." So whatever we did, we're doing something right here in this conversation. Jim Lieberthal says it would be nice for smaller companies to co-produce new work and allow it, like old-time musical theater circuit, to develop over time and be done more than once. That's an interesting thing. I always think about back in the so-called golden age of musical theater, you'd try the piece out in Baltimore and Philadelphia and New Haven, and the audience would tell you, "That's terrible, I hate that," and you'd rewrite it. And today in musical theater and in opera, sometimes the stakes are so high that you don't get a chance to really manipulate and change and tweak what you're working with. I think that's a bad thing for the, the art form. We have to be able to make mistakes. We have to be able to learn and do something more than once. Yeah. Speaking of which, how has your experience been like rewriting things? Have any of you had to do rewrites? And what's that like? Rachel?
On this piece specifically or generally?
Anything, opera-wise, I mean. Rewriting an opera.
Oh, well, I mean, it's a wonderfully collaborative art form. And I think like if the pandemic has taught me anything, it's that like my gauge for whether or not something is any good that I have done is completely gone. And so I'm very grateful to my collaborators who can say, I don't think this is quite right. And then I can tweak it. But what is that quote about how musicals are never finished, they're just abandoned? I think that's definitely true of opera as well, at least for me.
Yeah, I think Sheldon Harnick said, you never really finish, you just run out of time. Mark, you look like you were about to add something.
No, just when you mentioned these, I mean, I totally agree. I think it's something that I heard from some writer also saying, like, when do you finish a novel? You have to finish it, because if not, you will never end it in a way. It's very true.
Yeah. Great. So I think this is Liza Masilimova. It says, yes, Donya, it was cool to have this intimate access to opera in this project, and I agree it should continue past COVID. We have a question here. Do you write for an abstract voice, like a Fach, a soprano, alto, tenor, or bass, or do you have a specific singer's voice in mind when you are composing? Do you write to a specific voice or more generally?
It just depends on the project. Like if you're collaborating with someone that you already know their voice and you're comfortable and excited and passionate about writing for them, versus you get hired to write something and you're not really sure who's going to sing it, or maybe you know the singer, but you know who the singer is, but you've never worked with them before. So it just depends.
Any other experiences with or?
Well, I'm such a baby composer still, and I just write for myself. So I haven't really had the opportunity to write for other people yet. But yeah, I just write for my own voice, what I can do. And
you could do a lot, though.
Elizabeth, please release the albums.
Yeah.
I just want a whole album of you, please.
Someday, hopefully.
I knew all three of the people that were in my show, and so it was easy to write for them, and that was part of the fun. In fact, we did a fair amount of rewriting for Kate Jackman because of just understanding her notes. She was kind of a in between kind of mezzo, and so I needed to work with her to find the sweet spot notes, because I do believe that happy singers are a great marketing tool for composers, and they go around and going, oh, this is a great piece, or a great composer, or whatever. And so it is very important to keep the singers as happy as you possibly can be.
Boy, that's really good advice. I have gotten so much wonderful career advancement from singers. You have to make friends with them. They're lovely people too. They're so good at what they do. They've worked so hard. They're so well connected, and they're like, they're marketing machines. It's amazing.
I think, I think for me, the process of like writing kind of like for voice types per se, I think it just plays into like the character and the story that you're trying to tell too. Like before you know the vocalist, like if I like for instance for The Late Walk, I knew the vocalist that I was writing for, so it was a little bit different, and I also knew the character that they were portraying, so it was a little bit different. But like the opera that I've been writing for the past 3 years, it's imaginary singers right now, and so just thinking of keeping the tessitura comfortable for per voice part, I guess, per se, or per role, and thinking about like what kind of texture I want to happen for each voice part. I think that's making sense. Like, especially to line up with the character. Like, you know, how would they emote this if they were speaking it, and then how would they do it while singing it? Yeah.
Right. Let the character in the piece drive those decisions. Yeah. I mean, I think both ways. Danya, yeah.
I actually don't know how this works. How do really, like, how does the Met, how do major, or like Masada, Israel, like how do these major opera companies, how do they cast the singers? Right? That's kind of the same question here. Is like they hire, especially for smaller, or not smaller, but composers that are living. I wonder how they go about doing that. Do they just work with the resident artists, or?
I mean, in my, and obviously this isn't a big company, but I was like, the singers were cast when I was asked to write, or well, one of the singers had to drop out because of, her own reasons. And so I first of all wanted to hear what, like go to their websites and listen to their voices, because I didn't know any of them. And, and then I would ask questions. For example, I wanted the main character, because she's going through something where I thought a lot of times she would feel sort of downtrodden, even though she was a soprano. And so I didn't want to, have it constantly doing fireworks in the upper range. And so, I had to make sure that she would be okay singing some things in her chest voice. So, and then this isn't an opera, but, an art song that I wrote that had nobody in mind in particular, then I tried to keep it in as Jasmine was saying, just a tessitura that I thought more people could sing it, because I didn't have any particular person in mind. But I like to be able to have the person's voice in my head, so I'm really imagining a particular person doing it. And as I said, I'm kind of a neophyte, so, my experience is not that long, but I like that from right now anyway.
Mozart used to talk about fitting an aria to a singer like tailoring a suit, which is a fascinating thing to think about, especially when you think of an aria like Come Scolio or something, which is so insane. You just say, "What suit? Who were you cutting this on?" But I think it can never hurt to be thinking of an actual person. I wonder whether Verdi was thinking of an actual person when he wrote Violetta. You know what I mean? It's like three different singers of music. And
for me personally, I didn't even start writing. I didn't even put a note on the page until I got a confirmation from Takesha Miche Kizart because I was so excited. I was like, I felt like I had an opportunity, a golden opportunity with timing, with, the quarantining, and then, just the fact that she was.
You wrote some high stuff for her, man.
I did, but I had heard it. I heard, her repertoire, and I knew that it was possible for her. And we were able to talk through it and make it work perfectly. And she just floated through it. It was just kind of remarkable.
Amazing. Well, we're a little over an hour here, so we've had a great discussion here. I've really enjoyed and been enlightened by everything everybody said. I'd love to just give us a little closing question here and make sure everybody gets a chance. If you could give advice to people starting out, I'm going to write my first opera. What advice could you pass along to someone who might be watching?
I know this one.
Yeah, great, Mark.
Just be willing to collaborate, because this is such a medium of collaboration. Unless you do everything yourself, of course, but you can learn so much from others. And to pretend that just talking about the role as a composer, that you know everything, or that you know better, or that, well, of course, what they say it's fine, but I have my idea from the beginning and that's how it should be. I think that in the long run, it would be detrimental. I mean, I am only saying from my experience what I would do, but this is the most collaborative medium I've ever been in, and I've learned so much. And it's also part of what makes it so exciting and so grand.
I think that's good advice for your whole life, don't you? I mean, leave room for other people to be a part of your process. Yeah, absolutely. Advice.
Yeah, if you want to control everything, go into film. Be a director. That's like, if,
Director's
you know
complaints.
what I mean?
Jasmine, it looked like you had something to say there.
I was just gonna say, don't compare yourself to other operas that are already written, and be okay with yours sounding different than what you're normally used to hearing, and like that whole process, because it honestly is self-sabotage. And yeah, I'm really grateful to Bear Opera for asking me, because like I met Brianna Hunter at Glimmerglass, and that was when I first started writing opera, and that was just never anything on page, just like I think I want to do it. And for that to like have transferred into like, now it's just like, what? Okay, I'm done.
Brianna is the best. I love her so much. She is so great. Man, this is great. This is great life advice. Don't compare yourself to other people. Collaborate.
I would like
And be flexible.
Be flexible. Yeah.
I'll oversimplify by saying, do what you want to hear.
Yeah. I mean, I think a lot of us former singers who start writing operas, we want to write the role that we wanted to play, the role we wanted to sing. Great.
I'll say.
Go ahead. Go ahead.
No, you go.
All right, Elizabeth, you go first.
Okay.
Elizabeth. Put my
I mean, mine's kind of a conglomerate of all those things. Like, I think that it's just really important to follow your heart. And I know that's like cliche, but I really wanted to do this thing. And I had my own voices in my own head saying, oh, that's not right. That's, and I just had to keep telling myself, like, I can't do this wrong. And just do it. Just follow like that little tiny voice that is telling you to like step out of the box a little bit.
Yeah, and your piece, it came off so amazingly. I'm so glad that you didn't censor yourself, because it's extraordinary what you were able to do.
Thank you.
Rachel.
My variation on that is, don't wait for permission from other people to do what you want to do the way that you want to do it, and also find your people who can help you realize your vision wherever you are on your path. And thank you to Lyric Opera of the North for being more of my people.
Yeah, finding fun. That's such a good point, because finding funding, like if you're really young, like you're 20 and you're in college and you want to write an opera, it's like, well, you have to figure out how big it's going to be, who's going to fund you, how you're going to be able to put it on. If you want to put on like a 20-person production or 15-person production, and you really have to be organized and send emails out to people and just network, I would say, if you can.
Great. We've only got 3 you left.
Well, I guess my advice would be to sing.
Ooh.
And the most important teacher in my past, Robert Ward, wouldn't let me write anything if I couldn't play and sing it. And that's a little bit harsh, but it at least is a kind of ground point. I do think if you don't want to work it that way, at least work with singers, get to understand them. A voice is not a violin, a voice is not a saxophone. And
hallelujah.
Honestly, I will just give you some practical advice, is that if you want to be popular, write music that is about at the level of a very advanced college junior, and everyone in the world will do your music.
I hope everybody's taking notes. Yeah, Michael, my teacher used to do that to me too. Can you play it and sing it? And then I would have to do it in the lesson. If I couldn't do it, he'd say, go back and try again. Yeah. All right, wonderful.
I don't know if you're waiting for all of us to weigh in. Because
I was hoping you would.
Okay. Well, no, I think everything has already been said, but I just think the just be fearless, which is sort of a combination of different things. Fearless and humble, in the sense of being willing to learn. But I think that sort of the artist's way is that you have to be willing to do something not as well as you will do it later, in order to get to the point of doing it better. So the fact that if you start off and it seems difficult and maybe it doesn't seem 100% successful, If this is something that you really have a passion about, you have to be willing to go through the steps of, okay, this one student work, this one, and to allow yourself that room to grow and to develop and to master the craft.
Great advice.
I think I might be the last one, and
You are.
having courage is really, it's essential. I mean, it's essential as artists. What we do is we put ourselves on the line, but I think it takes a lot of courage to allow yourself to just be honest and say what needs to be said and what you believe in. And especially in opera, there's a lot of Febreze we can spray on things, a lot of places we can hide, and things that we can throw around. But to get at the core of what you're saying, what the story's saying, what your character's saying, I think that takes courage, and that's what I would encourage. That's what I do. I have that, like a bunch of people here. I know, Jasmine, you mentioned you've got composition students, but I'm lucky enough to teach, and that's my privilege, is that I get to be a voice in their head saying, as Maria said, have that courage.
Wonderful. Well, the only advice I can think of is just to be nice to everybody. Really, because if you want someone to ask you to do it again, you better hope they had a good time with you the first time, because it's way too hard to do with people you don't get along with, right? So if you're tough to work with, you're not going to get very far in this business. Be courageous, be a good collaborator, write things that people want to sing, write things that people want to see and hear, and tell the truth. You're well on your way if you can do all of those things. Well, I want to thank everybody for joining us today. Thank you to these guests. It's been a lovely evening talking about writing opera, listening to opera, performing in opera, and I'm so glad you all joined us. Tales from a Safe Distance is available to stream at DecameronOperaCoalition.org for the rest of the month. Tell a friend, buy a membership, buy a ticket for your friends for the holidays, and support new opera and support these wonderful companies that create it and provide opportunities for composers like you just saw tonight. And we'll see